Hey guys, welcome to a new section of our course. And this section is quite interesting because we will start to communicate with a backend API and retrieve some information from there to display on our app. Now, in order to do that, we will be using the Retrofit library. Okay, so the Retrofit library, first thing I want to say about it, it is not part of Jetpack. Okay, it is not part of Jetpack. The reason why I wanted to include it in our course and talk about it is because it has become an essential part of every Android developer's toolkit. Okay, it is a really useful library because it allows us to seamlessly communicate with the backend without worrying too much about network communications, error handling, things like threading, and all of that stuff is handled automatically by Retrofit. So it is a third-party library. It is not part of Jetpack, although I expect at some point that Google will integrate it in one way or another. But for now, it is completely separate. However, it is, like I said, really important. Now, what it does is basically facilitates retrieving data from an API. And it does this by, we need to simply implement a couple of classes in our code, run the methods, and it does everything for us and simply returns the data in the format that we ask for it. Now, which kind of data can we retrieve? Well, basically pretty much anything. By default, you can work with JSON, you can work with XML. It has a few different factory classes that provide access to different kinds of data. And of course, you can implement your own if you have any custom format of data on your backend API. And it also works really well with RxJava. Okay, so basically in this section, we will integrate Retrofit with RxJava to provide the data that we need in a very easy way in our application. Okay, so basically we will talk about RxJava briefly after this lecture, but just know that it works really well with Retrofit, and we will use both of these libraries in our application. Now, what would you need to actually implement Retrofit in an app? Well, the first thing you'll need is a Pojo class. A Pojo, if you're not aware of what it means, is basically a plain old Java object. Okay, it's a simple class that has some parameters, some values. And these values will be mapped to the data on the backend API. So it will retrieve the data from the backend API and put that data in a list of objects that you define as Pojo classes. Next thing we need is an interface. Now the interface basically specifies the endpoints that we're going to use. Okay, it tells the system where to find the data. It also defines the methods that we're going to need with their associated parameters. So we will specify what we need as parameters to the URL query in order to retrieve the correct information. And it also specifies the methods of the HTTP methods that we require in order to access that data. So that can be get, post, right? And we can have others like delete, but those aren't very common, I would say. So in our application, we will use only one endpoint because that's where we have the data. And we will retrieve that information from that endpoint using a get method. And the last thing we need is something to put all these together. So that is a service class, which basically specifies the URL, specifies how we construct our object to actually call to retrieve the data from the backend, specifies any converter methods or factory methods that will translate the data that we get from the API into our Pojo, and basically handles everything that we need. So we will use this service class or the object that we create from this class to retrieve information from the backend. And of course, we will see in our application exactly how we would implement these three classes and how we would use them together to retrieve the information in a very easy way from our backend. So that's it for this lecture. We will continue with a lecture on RxJava a brief overview because it is not necessarily part of Jetpack, but it is useful to know. And we will continue with that, and afterwards we will start to implement Retrofit in our code. So I will see you there.